Hey, friends. I never imagined I'd end up in this position, but apparently this is the only corner where I can pour out my soul and hear reasonable responses from strangers not connected to my family circle. I realize the text will be lengthy, so I apologize in advance. But there's no other way to describe it all. My parents passed away, first my father, then my mother. It happened within 1 year, and to this day it's hard for me to come to terms with it. But even harder was the truth that revealed itself after their deaths. All their possessions, the house, savings, even the modest cottage on the edge of Normandy, were left in the will to my cousin, and I, their only child, was left with nothing. Yes, I know how this might sound. The guy's whining about missed money. But it's not about the finances. It's about the fact that my whole life I strived to earn their approval, their affection, their belief in me. And in the end, it all went to someone else, not me. To make it clearer, I'll tell it from the beginning. I was born in a small French town near Paris. A typical middle-class family. My father, Pierre, worked as an electrician on construction sites. My mother, Sophie, was a nurse at the local hospital. They both came from rural areas, moved to the city for work, and spent their lives toiling to build a house, buy a car, and provide for my education. We weren't swimming in luxury, but we didn't know poverty either. In the summer, we'd go to the Côte d'Azur, and a couple of times we vacationed in Switzerland. The house always smelled of fresh baking. My mother loved making croissants and fruit tarts. My father was into craftsmanship. There was a little shed in our yard where he'd spend hours with tools. I grew up as a calm kid. I preferred books and home comfort over street games with a ball. My parents often noted that I was too thoughtful for my age. I thought they accepted me as I was. But everything changed when my cousin Anton entered our lives. Anton was the son of my father's sister, Claire. Her marriage fell apart when Anton was 5. His dad took off to Belgium somewhere and hasn't been involved in his upbringing since. Claire worked as an accountant, often stayed late, and so she regularly left her son with us. I remember the first time I saw him in our house. He was about 7, I was 8. He stood in the middle of the living room with a big backpack, in a bright blue jacket, grinning from ear to ear. From the start, he knew how to win over adults. He thanked them for every little thing, praised Mom's tarts, admired Dad's tools. I, on the other hand, was quiet and shy. I watched as my parents lit up from his smiles, and I felt a strange tingling inside. He was just a guest, but over time he became almost a full member of our home. We went to the same school, sat at the same desk, often did homework together. But there was always an invisible rivalry between us. He was charming, full of energy, loved sports, and easily made friends. I remained the quiet know-it-all. One incident stuck in my memory. I was about 12, Anton 11. We were playing soccer in the yard with the neighborhood kids. I accidentally scored a goal, and for the first time I felt like the center of attention. But before I could enjoy it, Anton ran up to Dad and shouted, "Did you see what a pass I made?" And guess what? Dad praised him, not me but him. I stayed silent then, but something broke inside me. That was the first time I thought, maybe I really am worse. Over the years, such incidents only piled up. For Christmas, my parents gave me books, but Anton got new sneakers or sports gadgets. It seemed like they tried harder to please him than me. I tried talking to my mother about it more than once, but she always said the same thing. "You know we love you more than anything. It's just harder for Anton, he doesn't have a father." And I'd fall silent, because I didn't want to seem selfish. When I turned 18, I enrolled in university in Lyon. My parents helped with tuition, but I covered most of the expenses myself, worked as a bartender, then got a job at the library. I lived in a tiny rented apartment and only visited home on holidays. Anton also tried to go to university but dropped out after a year. He was always looking for easy paths, selling used gadgets, trying to start an online shop, working at a car service but quitting quickly. My parents kept saying he was just finding his way, and I quietly boiled inside. I was finding my way too, but I worked hard and took responsibility for my life. Over time, I noticed Anton hanging around my parents more and more. He helped Dad around the house, drove Mom to the stores, had dinner with them almost every day. When I visited, It felt like he was their son, and I was some distant guest stopping by briefly. A few years ago, my mother got seriously ill. At first, we thought it was a minor ailment, but the diagnosis was much darker. Constant clinic visits, tests, treatments began. I was working in Lyon then, juggling 2 jobs to pay off my mortgage and student loans. I visited when I could, but it wasn't enough. But Anton, surprisingly, was there. He drove Mom to doctors, sat with her, helped with shopping. I can't deny it, I was grateful to him then. It seemed like he really showed his best side. I even felt ashamed for feeling so jealous before. But at the same time, I noticed my parents growing even closer to him. Dad called him real help, Mom, our support. And I felt out of place again. A year ago, Dad passed away. Heart attack. It happened suddenly. In the evening, he was still fixing the kitchen faucet. In the morning, Mom found him unconscious. I rushed over as soon as I heard, but I was too late. A few months later, Mom went too. She seemed to break after Dad's death. Her illness worsened rapidly, and no help could save her. I buried both of them, and I was convinced that now my duty was to preserve their memories, take care of the house, continue their traditions. But then came the day the will was read. A few weeks after the funeral, I was still wandering around in a fog. Every morning I'd wake up and forget for a moment that my parents were gone. Then reality would hit, and I'd sink into that emptiness again. The only thing that required my involvement was handling the inheritance. My parents weren't millionaires, but they had a 2-story house in the Paris suburbs, a small plot of land in Provence, savings in the bank, and of course, things, furniture, Dad's tool collection. All of it should go to me. At least, that's what I thought. The notary they'd worked with for years invited us to a meeting. He insisted that all close relatives be present. That already seemed suspicious, but I didn't pay attention. That day I arrived early. The notary's office was in an old building in central Paris. Narrow hallway, smell of coffee and documents, heavy wooden door with a brass plaque. When I entered, Aunt Claire and Anton were already there. He was in an elegant gray suit with a neat beard and watches that clearly cost more than my monthly salary. I was even surprised. Where did he get the money for such polish? Last I heard, he'd folded his used car business again. We nodded to each other. I didn't sit next to them, chose a chair across. The atmosphere was tense, like we were all waiting for the climax of some drama. Finally, the notary appeared, Monsieur Dupont, a thin man in his 60s with gray temples. He greeted us, sat at the massive desk, and opened a folder with papers. "Thank you for coming. Today we'll read the will of your parents, Pierre and Sophie. I want to emphasize, they drew it up in advance and everything is in order." I felt my palms clench. Part of me worried about possible catches, but overall I was sure all the property would go to me. That's how it should be. I'm their only child. Monsieur Dupont began reading the text. His voice was even, but each word hit me like a sledgehammer. "We, Pierre and Sophie, of sound mind and firm memory, draw up this will. Our property, including the house in Paris, the plot in Provence, bank accounts, and other assets, we bequeath to our nephew Antoine." I held my breath. I didn't even grasp the meaning right away. "Excuse me, what?" I blurted out. But the notary continued reading. Not a word about me. Not a single mention. When he finished, silence hung in the room. I felt blood pounding in my temples. "This must be some mistake," I said, looking from the notary to Claire. "They couldn't have done that. I'm their son." The notary calmly shook his head. "There's no mistake. The will was drawn up 2 years ago, signed by both parents and notarized." I turned to Anton. He sat with a completely impassive expression, but the corners of his lips twitched, a slight smile. "Why?" I squeezed out. "Why did they do this?" Aunt Claire sighed deeply. "Maybe because Anton was always there," she replied. "You lived in Lyon, visited rarely, and he helped your mother every day, especially after Pierre's death." I flared up. "I helped too. I came when I could, sent money, supported them." "No one's disputing that," the notary interjected softly. "But the decision was made this way. I have no right to discuss their reasons." I wanted to shout that it was unfair, that it was betrayal, but the words stuck in my throat. After the official part, we went outside. I caught up with Anton at the entrance. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked, holding back anger. He shrugged. "I knew they appreciated me, but what was in the will, I only found out today." "Don't lie, you must have convinced them, pushed them." He smirked. "You know, sometimes affection isn't earned with degrees and income. Sometimes people just need someone who's there." Those words burned me from the inside. He spoke so evenly, as if it was my fault that I led my own life, built a career, instead of hanging around my parents all day. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat in my rented apartment, staring at the wall, trying to make sense. How could they do this? Yes, I wasn't the perfect son. I didn't always call as often as I should. Sometimes I argued with Mom. Sometimes I debated with Dad, but I loved them. I thought it was obvious. And it turned out that my whole life, I'd been competing for their attention with someone they ultimately preferred over me. Hundreds of questions swirled in my head. Maybe I really was too distant. Maybe they felt I didn't need their support. Or did Anton really convince them that he deserved it all? The more I thought, the more I tormented myself. A few days later, I scheduled a one-on-one meeting with the notary. I wanted to clarify, could the will be contested? Monsieur Dupont listened calmly and impassively. "Formally, you can file a lawsuit," he said. "But the prospects are slim. The will is properly executed. Medical reports confirm that at the time of signing, both were competent." "But this is absurd," I exploded. "How can parents leave everything to a nephew and not mention their own son?" He shrugged. "The motives of the testators are not subject to legal evaluation." I left there feeling completely powerless. Aunt Claire called soon after. Her tone was soft, but there was firmness in it. "I understand it hurts," she said, "but maybe you should accept your parents' choice and not stir up a scandal." "So just accept that they erased me from their lives," I snapped. "No one erased you. You were important to them, but sometimes parents see things differently than we expect." I hung up. Every time I mentally returned to this story, I felt one thing: betrayal. I remembered childhood, how they held my hands, how Mom said, "You're the most precious thing in our lives." And now those words seemed like a lie. They preferred him. Not me, their son, but an outsider. And the worst part, I couldn't talk to them, couldn't ask, couldn't explain. All I had left were documents with stamps and the notary's signature. After the will was read, I felt like a stranger in my own family. Aunt Claire called every couple of days, at first kindly, then more insistently. "You need to let it go," she kept saying. "Your parents decided this, and it's their right." "Their right," I flared up. "What about my right to be their son?" In response, she sighed. "You're an adult. You have a job, an apartment, a future. It's harder for Anton. He was always closer to them." Those words drove nails into my chest. I still decided to consult a lawyer. In Lyon, I had an acquaintance attorney, Madame Leclerc. We met in her office. White walls, stacks of files, smell of coffee. "Formally, you can file a suit," she said. "But consider, the process will drag on for months, possibly years. The chances are slim." "But this is ridiculous," I couldn't hold back. "How can parents leave everything to a nephew and not mention their own son?" She shrugged. "It happens. The law allows it. You have to decide, do you want to fight or accept it?" I left the office feeling like I'd hit a dead end. A couple of weeks later, I saw Anton again. He invited me to a cafe in central Paris. I wanted to refuse at first, but curiosity won. We sat at a table by the window. He ordered a latte and a croissant. I got black coffee. "Listen," he started, "I understand this is hard for you, but maybe we shouldn't start a war." "Are you serious?" I almost dropped my cup. "They left everything to you. You took my home, my childhood, my memories, and now you're suggesting no war." He looked at me calmly. "I didn't take anything. They decided it themselves." "And you didn't push them, didn't convince them?" He smiled with the corner of his mouth. I was just there. Maybe you should ask yourself why you weren't. That phrase hit harder than any blow. At night, I tossed and turned without sleep. Anton's words spun in my head. Maybe you should ask yourself why you weren't there. I remembered my student years' work moves, remembered how I didn't always answer Mom's calls, how I sometimes got irritated with Dad, how rarely I visited home in recent years. Maybe it's really my fault. Maybe they felt I was drifting away. But then came another thought. I loved them. Life just didn't allow me to be there all the time. Didn't they understand that? A month after the reading, I decided to go to my parents' house. I wanted to take at least personal items, photo albums, books, Mom's jewelry. When I arrived, Anton was already living there. He opened the door in a t-shirt and jeans like the owner. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Living," he replied evenly. "This is my house now. I need my parents' things, photos, letters, Mom's jewelry." He shrugged. "Listen, that's part of the property now, but if you want, you can take a couple of pictures." "A couple," I almost exploded. "These are my parents, this is my family." "Your parents left it to me," he said coldly, "so accept it." I left, slamming the door so the windows rattled. On the way to Lyon, I sat on the train staring out the window. Fields, villages, stations flashed by, and in my head only one thought: they betrayed me. I felt like an orphan, even though I had parents for most of my life. But their decision crossed out everything. In Lyon, I met with my old friend Julian. We sat in a bar on Montmartre, sipping beer. "Bro, I'd sue," he said. "Not for the money, but for justice." "But the chances are low," I sighed, "and it'll drag on for years." "And if you let it go, can you live peacefully?" I thought about it and realized I didn't know the answer. The last straw was Anton's call. "Listen," he said, "I want to renovate the house, thinking of demolishing the old shed." I almost dropped the phone. The shed was my childhood place, where Dad taught me to hold a hammer, where we made bird feeders together. "If you do that," I said through gritted teeth, "you're dead to me for good." He just smirked. "The house is mine now." I hung up and realized I didn't want anything to do with him anymore. After the conversation about the shed, I wandered around in a trance for a few days. It felt like the ground was pulled out from under me. The house where my childhood happened no longer belonged to me. Every item, every board, every scratch on the floor was now under Anton's control. I pulled out the documents from the folder, printed a copy of the will, and laid it in front of me. I stared at those lines over and over, as if hoping the words would change. The lawyer said there was a tiny chance to win. The trial would be long, costly, painful. And even if I got a review, what would it change? Parents can't be brought back. On the other hand, if I let go, could I live peacefully? Wouldn't I remember every night that I allowed myself to be erased from their lives? I still decided. In early spring, I gathered the documents and filed in court. The process started. The first hearing was set for June, but even before that, the calls, letters, pressure began. Claire sent long messages. "Think about it, you're dishonoring your parents' memory. They made a choice, and you're going against their will." Anton sent cold texts. "You just want to grab the money. Everyone gets it." I didn't respond, but inside I was boiling. I wasn't doing it for the money. I wanted to prove their decision was a mistake, that I mattered too. The first hearing lasted only an hour. Anton's lawyer looked confident. Stack of papers, medical certificates, signatures. "The testators were of sound mind," he repeated. "The will is legal." My lawyer tried to press on the moral side, that excluding the only child is illogical and suggests pressure. But the judge remained impassive. After the hearing, Anton and I ran into each other in the hallway. "You'll lose anyway," he said, looking straight in my eyes, "and end up with nothing." I didn't answer. Every day I asked myself the same question: why am I doing this? Can I prove anything? Or am I just wasting energy and money, destroying what's left of the family? I caught myself starting to hate not only Anton but my parents too, for putting me in this situation, for making a choice I can't accept. That hatred scared me. Julian dragged me to the bar again. "You're driving yourself crazy," he said. "You're not living anymore, just existing." But if I back down, it means they won, that I was erased. No, Julian shook his head. It means you chose yourself. You have one life and you're spending it warring with ghosts. Those words sank deep. At the second hearing, I told my lawyer I wanted to withdraw the suit. He tried to talk me out of it for a long time, but I was firm. That day, I felt relief, like I dropped a sack of stones from my shoulders. I realized, no matter how much I fight, it won't bring my parents back. I can't change their decision, but I can change my life. I called him myself. "I'm dropping the suit," I said. He paused, then said, "A smart decision." "Don't think you won," I replied. "I just don't want my life defined by your house or their will anymore." He smirked. "We'll see." I hung up and realized that was our last conversation. Update a year later. A year has passed. I went to Spain, rested for the first time in years. Changed jobs, now I'm at a publishing house working with books, which I dreamed about back in university. I don't communicate with Anton or my aunt. Sometimes I hear news through acquaintances. He renovated the house, demolished the shed, planted a new garden. Yes, it hurts to hear, but it's not my life anymore. I still think about my parents. Sometimes I get angry at them, sometimes I cry. But more often, I remember the good moments. How Mom taught me to bake croissants, how Dad showed me how to fix a bike. Those memories are mine. No one can take them away. I realized inheritance isn't money or walls. It's memory, experience, love that we carry inside. And even though the papers said everything went to Anton, the real inheritance stayed with me.